Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Chelsea, Bournemouth. Chelsea win their fourth consecutive game of the Premier League season and keep pace with Liverpool. How did they do it? Did Bournemouth cause them any problems? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to break down how Chelsea beat Bournemouth. So Chelsea, Bournemouth, Chelsea looking to continue their great start to the season, looking to win their fourth consecutive game, but Bournemouth was not going to be an easy task. In today's video, we're going to break down why Bournemouth moved to a three-man backline, how Chelsea dealt with in the first half, and why Sarri had to make changes in the second half. When we look at the board, we have Bournemouth in 3-4-3. Basically, they had Fraser, Wilson, King up front, and midfield, they went with Lerma and Gosling. Out in wing-back areas, they went with Rico and Smith, and then at the back, Cook, Francis, and Ake. You think about Bournemouth, 3-4-3 at Stamford Bridge that ended up dropping into a 5-4-1. They played very narrow. The midfield sat a bit deeper, and then they try to keep things compact. Whereas we look at Chelsea, 4-3-3, as we expected. Williams coming into the starting lineup with Morata and Hazard. In midfield, no changes. Kovacic, Jorginho, and Conte out in wider areas as Piliqueta, Alonso, Rudiger, and Luis keep their pace. Now we have to think about how are Chelsea going to break them down. Well, you have those two players in Willian coming in for Pedro this time, and it would be interesting to see how that would line up. But first, we have to get to Bournemouth. So when we get to Bournemouth, we have to look at why they dropped into that shape, why they ended up changing their system. Well, they moved to a 5-4-1, and basically they know that Chelsea's wider players are going to play narrow, so they probably wanted extra cover in those positions. They had the wing backs also tucking in to ensure that they couldn't really find spaces into the channels. But then when you think about the midfield bank, the wider players tucked in, and what happened there was that obviously there was a lot of space out wide for Chelsea's fullbacks to get forward, but a lot of it was down to Bournemouth ensuring that Chelsea did not dominate the center of the pitch. They have those players narrow to ensure that it's very compact. What they have now is they have Lerma and Gosling who could step forward to Conte and Kovacic, and they often had Wilson sitting ahead or around Jorginho to ensure that he couldn't dictate play from deep. However, there were times where Jorginho would get in beyond Wilson because Wilson wasn't expected, or if you're being realistic, you don't expect him to really sit on Jorginho for the entire game. He doesn't have that discipline. When that would happen, you would see Lerma or Gosling step out, and that would be a time to spring in Conte or Kovacic. But Chelsea had problems breaking through the middle, and what happened was that it also didn't really help them that Willian and Hazard, or more so Hazard and Morata, were covering and looking to pick up the ball in those positions as well. So that was what they were trying to do, trying to limit the space out wide. They knew that if their wide player was pushing forward, they could obviously shift out one of the narrow King or Fraser to push out and then have the midfield bank switch over. And they knew that if Willian or Hazard tried to drift out wide, they could get numbers there too and possibly have a center back push over. If Willian gets it out wide, you push Rico, and then you could have another center back come across as well. So it was just to ensure that they had enough numbers in midfield and in the final third, in their third of the pitch, so that Chelsea couldn't really dominate in those areas. So it obviously did cause few issues for Chelsea because they have a lot of players that want to cut through the center of the pitch, that want to play intricate passes, and that was how Bournemouth thought they would get at Chelsea. Whereas when they did create the minimal chances, it came from getting in behind Chelsea when they picked up the ball in transition. You think about their first chance, it's Kovacic who's pressed by Gosling early, and he doesn't even know that Kovacic doesn't even know that Gosling's coming to him. What happens is that Alonso is so high, so Fraser's able to break in and get the pass. He delivers a cross into the box, but no one sees it. There's another time when the ball is switched out. Willian is caught up the pitch. What happens? The ball is switched out to Rico. Rico has time and space to deliver a cross into the box. You see Wilson come across. He gets onto it, but he can't guide it on goal. Then you look at one more opportunity where this time it's Gosling again, just scooping the ball into that left channel. It's Wilson who picks it up. He obviously gets tracked because he darts into that space, but when he delivers a cross into the box, no one is there to get onto it. They had a few half opportunities where they did find space in transition. However, they just weren't unable to get numbers forward to help out Wilson or to help out Fraser in that situation. But in the sense of how they were set up, they were looking to disrupt Chelsea to ensure that they couldn't play through the middle and to ensure that they had enough numbers for Hazard and for Willian to make sure that they couldn't play intricate passes and bypass the Bournemouth defense. So when we get to Chelsea's chances, basically how Chelsea had to overcome Bournemouth was they had to go long, they had to go into wide areas. Why? Because obviously, as we said, Bournemouth is compressing the space, they're playing a higher line, and now there's really no way for the Chelsea midfielders to get the passes into Hazard, into Morata. They did on a few occasions, but it often didn't lead to any goal-scoring chances. When we think about how Chelsea played over the top, well, the one problem here is that with Wilson sitting on Jorginho, you're giving space for Rudiger and Luis to get on the ball. Obviously, in this situation, you would want the center backs on the ball, but Rudiger and Luis are very good passers for center backs. And with no pressure being applied, it was very simple. It was about the attackers timing their runs. We look at the first few opening 5 minutes. We have Rudiger. At one point, Jorginho found space, finds Morata breaking in, finds Hazard breaking in. On both of those occasions, Francis had to come across to ensure that they weren't able to get on to the goal. We think about Luis on 2 occasions, pushing forward, finding Willian breaking in behind Rico. One time it was Rico made a great interception and came across with him. The other time the ball was overhit. Chelsea were finding avenues over the top. There's no pressure on the ball players. And it was about timing the runs, and the Chelsea players did, but Bournemouth were able to cope. The other area they could go down is the flanks. Azpilicueta was always an option. He was getting forward, overlapping with Willian, combining with Hazard and Willian as well when Hazard drifted over, but his crosses weren't meeting his teammates. Then we get to Marcos Alonso, who has been their key attacking player this season. Again, it's Conte breaking forward, being able to find space for Alonso, delivers across the front post in the 6-yard box. It's cleared. Okay, another opportunity, we have Luis pushing forward, clipping it over Alonso, who makes the run in behind Smith, gets onto it. His cross is obviously clear to Jorginho, who fires a shot inches wide. We think about Chelsea, obviously Alonso and Azpilicueta taking a big risk because you could have King and Fraser break out into that space. But when you look at it as a whole, there was no pressure on the ball there, a lot of space in wide areas, and that's where Chelsea were getting their chances. But the biggest problem was Hazard wasn't getting involved because he was often drifting into central positions and he wasn't being able to get onto the ball because of how Bournemouth were shaped. We think about Chelsea's best chance. It stems from Bournemouth actually pressing from the front. And what happens here is that they press from the front. You have the wider players pushing on. What happens is that a ball is played out to Willian and he drags Ake out of position. He drags Ake out of position. What happens here is that you have the 2 center midfielders, Lerma and Gosling, pressing the center forwards. You have King pressing Azpilicueta. What happens there is Conte is able to get across. They combine. Conte now breaks forward. It's a counterattack. He ends up playing a pass into Morata, who makes the run into that space. Morata, now the center backs come across, plays across over to Hazard. Hazard can shoot, but he tees up Alonso breaking in and he hits the post. But when you think about Chelsea in the first half, wide areas, balls over the top, that was where they were finding their joy. But they needed to get Eden Hazard more involved, and Sarri had to make changes in the second half. So we move to the second half, and what happens there is that Bournemouth drop a bit deeper, defending closer to their penalty box. And the one change that Chelsea made is that Eden Hazard now drifts more to the touchline. He plays a bit more wider, and what that allows him to do is, one, pick up the ball. We see Cristiano Ronaldo doing this for Juventus. When he's not getting service in central areas, he'll move out wide so he can get 1v1 situations. It just allows more space for the player. It allows him to get back into the groove of the game, and that's what Hazard was doing. And what we've seen here is that Chelsea have a good triangle. Alonso is attack-minded, Kovacic, if they could get Jorginho going into that as well, they could create a lot of great passing moves, and we saw that here in the second half. We saw, like I said, Kovacic picking up the ball, sliding in Hazard. And what happens is that 2 markers do run with him. And what happens is that unlike most center backs, you'll have Alonso drifting into that space there. So what happens is that he drops them, he ends up pulling it back, and Alonso ends up forcing the save out of the keeper. And we see that throughout the half, and it's just a big thing is that Hazard is arguably one of the better players in the Premier League, if not the best player in the Premier League. And his ability to just pull players out of position, use his dribbling to drag markers to him, that was a key change in the second half, because now that opened up space for his teammates, and that was pivotal. The one issue that Chelsea did have, before we get back to what they did well, was that there was a lot of space in these areas. Luckily for them, they never really got hit on the counterattack. There's one time where Wilson did break free, but Conte tracked and did get booked, but he did impede that counterattack. There's one time where Rudiger got pulled out and Frazier was free later on in the second half, but he quickly fired his shot wide of the net. But when you look at Bournemouth as a whole, they sat a bit deeper, and it was just about whether Chelsea could break them down. Again, everything down the left, it was good combination. There was good spacing. A lot of people were complaining about Newcastle that there wasn't enough width. Here, if Hazard was out wide, Alonso would tuck it narrow. On the other side, Willian would obviously be more central, and then they'd have Azpilicueta pushing forward from a wider position. The problem with Chelsea is that they weren't getting enough from Morata. They weren't getting service into him. When he did get it, he wasn't doing much with it. And with Willian in the first half where he's breaking him behind, here, now he was very predictable, often always drifting out to his right. The other team knew that they were able to just push him out and ensure that he couldn't deliver dangerous crosses into the box, and that forced Sarri into a change. He brought on Pedro, he brought on Giroud in quick succession, and what happened is that although Pedro did score the goal, didn't really offer much in terms of changing the game systematically. Giroud does, in the sense that he's able to pull defenders back, play with his back to goal, link play. We look at one instance where you have Hazard wide, or you have Hazard a bit more central, and then you have Alonso wide, or Alonso's narrow, you have Hazard wide, Kovacic goes wide as well, ends up picking up the ball, plays it into Giroud, gets it back, fires a shot twice, that's blocked. But again, you see that Giroud's able to just hold himself off, and that is essentially what leads to the goal, because what happens here is that Alonso, again, in that central role, and we have Hazard and we have Azpilicueta holding the width there. What happens is that Alonso's found between the lines. He ends up playing it to Pedro. Pedro combines with Giroud, ends up getting the ball back, a nice wall pass, and he's able to fire a deflected effort past the keeper. We think about changes that are made. Ruben Loftus-Cheek comes in. Bournemouth end up changing their system after going behind, after finding some space. King and Wilson finding space in those wider channels. What happens is that they move to more of a 4-2-3-1. They bring on Mousset. They bring on Jordan Ibe, Lerma, and Gosling stick in midfield. And what happens here is that now, like before, you get more 1v1s with Hazard. Hazard, on one situation, goes 1v1 with Francis, beats him with ease, but his cross that's supposed to be going into Giroud is caught by Begovic. But the goal, again, sums up what Chelsea do well. You think about their key goals this season, the winner against Arsenal, the opening goal at Newcastle down the left, combination between Hazard and Alonso. Again, it's Hazard picking up the ball, two markers on him, Ibe and Francis. He's able to play the pass into Alonso. He's able to run outside. Alonso has both of them marking him now. He's able to poke it back into Hazard. Hazard's able to finish superbly, and that is the game. When you look at it as a whole, Bournemouth, their initial system, very wise, trying to ensure that Chelsea's controllers couldn't dictate the tempo of the game, but they ran a risk with their high line. Chelsea broke free, weren't able to convert chances, and then in wider areas, Chelsea were able to get their fullbacks forward, but again, weren't able to create chances. But the big issue for Chelsea was getting Hazard involved, and in the second half, they did that, moving him out wide, and he was able to take control of the game and finally take initiative. And as Bournemouth sat deeper, Chelsea were able to find gaps in those wider areas, and again, it's their key partnership. Eden Hazard, arguably the best player in the league. Marcus Alonso offering a goal threat going forward, whether it be in a wide position or it be in a narrow position. Again, those two combined. And again, you have to give Sarri some credit. Giroud offered more of a presence with his back to goal, able to link play and bring his teammates in. And that is why there's a big debate as to whether he should start for Chelsea. Then you have Pedro, who ended up scoring the game-winning goal, and he deserves credit as well. But let me know what you guys think. Is this Chelsea side the real deal? Can they win the Premier League title? What about Bournemouth? What could they have done differently here? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.